Yo, what is up everyone? Randy here. Today we're going to be talking about the 14mm F2.8 from Rokinon and why I think it's a lens that everyone needs to have in their kit. So, let's get into it. Alright guys, so let's go through the specs of this lens real quick. So this is a 14mm focal length. This has got a minimum aperture of f2.8 and it ranges from f2.8 to f22. It's got this built-in pedal style lens hood. It's non-removable, so it's built into the lens. It's also got fully manual controls, so you got a manual aperture ring and a manual focus ring. And then it's got a minimum focus distance of 10.8 inches, so it's going to let you get real close to your subject and still be able to get focus, so that can give you some really unique angles. And then another feature or another spec of this is that this is compatible with both full frame and APS-C style cameras, so regardless of your sensor size you can get this lens to work on it, and Rokinon actually makes mounts for pretty much all cameras for this lens. You also get 115 degrees field of view on a full frame camera and 90 degrees field of view on an APS-C camera, so you're gonna get a lot of field of view and a lot of your scene into your pictures. I figured let's hop into the pros and cons of this lens. I've been using this lens for a little over a year and a half now, and while it does have some cons, as you can tell from my intro, I believe that the pros far outweigh those cons. So the first pro of this lens is the optical quality and sharpness. So I was actually a little bit surprised when I unboxed this. A lot of reviews online had said that this lens is very sharp, and when I finally got around to testing it out and trying it, I was actually really surprised with how sharp this lens is, especially at the price range that it comes in at, which we'll talk about in a second. So even at f2.8, shooting this lens wide open, I was getting really crispy pictures, and if I was stopping this down to 5.6 or f8, it was just incredibly sharp. You know, some people online have compared the sharpness in this lens to an L series lens from Canon, and I can see why. So the next pro of this lens is that it's actually built pretty well. It's got a plastic housing, but then it's got a metal mount, and I've never had any problems with it. It seems really solid. It's got a good weight. It's got this big front lens element, and it's just got a really good build quality, so that was something that was a little bit surprising to me too. I've had lenses like the Nifty 50s from Canon, and you got the plastic mounts that seemed like they could break. So it was really nice to see that this comes with a metal mount and that the lens quality and the build is actually really good. So another big pro of this lens is that it works on both full frame and APS-C cameras. So regardless of the type of camera that you have, you can make this lens work. So if say you're on an APS-C and you're maybe planning on eventually in the future upgrading to a full frame camera, this is a good lens because you're not going to have to re-buy this same focal length. If you buy it for your APS-C, later when you upgrade, you're also going to be able to use this lens, which is going to save you a little bit of money in the long run. So the biggest pro to this lens, in my opinion, is the price. You can currently pick one of these up on Amazon for $339. I'll leave a link in the description below, and that will be an affiliated link, so if you buy through that link, it will help the channel out. But for $339, you can't really find a better lens in this focal length. If you shop around other ultra wides from different manufacturers, you'll find that you're going anywhere from $600 to $2,000, and a lot of them won't even match up to the optical quality of this lens. So I know some of you guys might be thinking, why is this lens so cheap and why does it have such good image quality? And I had that exact same question. And what Rokinon has done is they've decided to focus on the optics and have left everything else manual. And that's actually going to be the first con that we're going to be talking about. So this lens is fully manual, so you don't get any EXIF data, which will tell you in your pictures what your aperture and your shutter speed were. And you also don't get any aperture controls or autofocus. So this lens is completely manual. Every time you want to choose your aperture, you actually have to choose it on the lens, and then you have to manually focus every shot. Now this can take a little bit to get used to, and it definitely was a little bit harder to shoot on the first month, but once I got used to it, it became a lot easier. With my camera, I have an A7R II, and I actually have focus peaking, so that's made it a little bit easier to make sure that all my shots are in focus, which is a big complaint that I'm hearing online. But if you just take the time to learn it, to learn how to use the manual focus, this is actually a really good lens, but that is a con. And then the next con with this lens, which is going to be easier to show you in the computer, so we'll hop into the computer, is actually the vignetting and the barrel distortion. Alright guys, so we're just inside of Adobe Lightroom right now, and this picture is really going to give you a good idea of the vignetting that this lens has. So as you can tell up here in the corners, it does have a decent amount of vignetting as the sky kind of gradiates towards a darker color, and then down here in the foreground it does the same thing, and that's pretty typical when I take pictures with this lens. But what you can do inside of Adobe Lightroom is go down to your lens corrections, you hit enable profile corrections, and then you can find the Rokinon 14mm, and you see how it gets rid of all of that vignetting for us. So if I toggle this on and off, you can see that it's gotten rid of all that vignetting. But one of the things that it does do when you do this, it does tend to bump the exposure up a little bit, so I typically bump it down a little bit once I enable the profile corrections. So next we're going to look at a picture that I took at Yosemite as well, kind of a similar composition, just without me in it. So in this you can see that it is starting to vignette down here, and then you also see it when you zoom into 1:1 that it does start to lose a little bit of the quality towards the corners. But then once we kind of go more towards the center, you can see that this lens is tack sharp. So you can do the same thing here. We can enable the profile corrections, go make, hit Rokinon, and then find the 14mm lens. And you see that it does those corrections in the corner, but like I was saying earlier, it does tend to up your exposure a little bit. So if I wanted to get the same type of exposure, I would drop it about a half stop, maybe a little bit less than that. So this next picture is really going to show you the barrel distortion of this lens. And this is a picture of an interior, obviously, where you have more straight lines. So this is where it's going to be more prominent and you're going to be able to recognize it more. So if I disable the profile corrections, I had them enabled, you can see that these beams kind of start to curve. The vertical lines right here on the wall are starting to curve. But then once we correct it, it actually does a pretty good job of straightening these lines out. So by doing the profile lens corrections, you can get rid of some of the distortion and the vignetting, but it is definitely a con to this lens. Alright guys, that's pretty much it for this one. I hope you found this review of the Rokinon 14mm 2.8 lens helpful. It does take a little bit of getting used to, but I highly recommend this lens. Once you get used to all the manual exposure controls, you can get some really good images out of it. So hit that like button if you found the video helpful, subscribe. I got a lot more content coming, and of course, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.